The champagne glass shattered against the hardwood floor, and in that frozen moment, everything changed. Madison Hartwell, heiress to a pharmaceutical empire worth $4.2 billion, stood in her Louboutins, mascara-streaked face flushed with rage, staring at the quiet man she'd just publicly humiliated. She'd called him a coward, a deadbeat, a nobody taking up space in a bar meant for people who matter. The entire establishment had gone silent, 50 pairs of eyes fixed on the scene unfolding near the pool tables. But it was the look on the man's face, not anger, not embarrassment, just a deep, weathered sadness, that would haunt Madison for the rest of her life. Because in exactly 3 minutes, she would discover that the nobody she'd just berated was anything but ordinary, and the lesson she was about to learn would cost her everything she thought she knew about worth, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be somebody. James Mitchell hadn't wanted to go out that Friday evening. His daughter Sophie, barely 8 years old, had finally convinced him after weeks of asking. "Please, Daddy. Just for a little while. Mrs. Chen next door can watch me. You never do anything fun anymore." Her words had pierced through his defenses, those big brown eyes so much like her mother's, and he'd relented. 1 beer. Maybe 2. Just to remember what it felt like to exist outside the endless cycle of school drop-offs, grocery shopping, and helping with homework that had become his entire universe since the accident took his wife 3 years ago. The Anchor and Oak wasn't his usual scene. Honestly, he didn't have a usual scene anymore, but it was quiet on weeknights, tucked away in a corner of the financial district where the after-work crowd had mostly cleared out by 8. He'd settled into a booth near the back, nursing a beer he wasn't really tasting, thinking about Sophie's upcoming science fair project and whether he'd remembered to sign her permission slip for the field trip. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the commotion building near the bar's entrance. Madison Hartwell was having the worst day of a spectacularly terrible week. Her father had announced his intention to hand control of Hartwell Pharmaceuticals to her younger brother. Her fiancé, a hedge fund manager she'd dated for 2 years, had called off their engagement via text message. And now, adding insult to injury, she'd just been cut off by the bartender who apparently had the audacity to suggest she'd had enough. She'd stumbled backward from the bar, her 4th martini still unfinished, when she collided with something solid. James had been walking to the restroom when it happened. The impact sent him sideways, and his beer splashed across his shirt, one of only 3 button-downs he owned, all purchased from Target during a back-to-school sale. He'd immediately apologized, his first instinct always to de-escalate, to make himself smaller, to avoid confrontation at all costs. It was a habit formed through years of training, ironically enough, where control and composure could mean the difference between life and death. But Madison, fueled by alcohol and a lifetime of never hearing the word no, had erupted. "Are you kidding me? Do you know how much this dress costs?" She gestured wildly at the cocktail dress that probably cost more than James's monthly rent. "Of course you don't. Look at you. What are you even doing here? This isn't some dive bar for losers who can't afford a decent shirt." The bar had quieted then, conversations trailing off as people turned to watch. James had remained calm, his voice steady. "Ma'am, I apologize. It was an accident. I'll pay for the dry cleaning if what? If you can even afford it." Madison had laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the exposed brick walls. "Let me guess. You're what, between jobs? Living off unemployment. Probably divorced because you couldn't hold it together." Her words had grown sharper, meaner, each one carefully chosen to wound. "You're exactly what's wrong with this country. People like you, taking up space, contributing nothing, probably looking for someone to feel sorry for you. Well, newsflash, nobody cares about your problems." James had absorbed every word without flinching, his hands loose at his sides, his breathing controlled. Those who knew him well, and very few people did anymore, would have recognized the stillness in his posture, the way his eyes had gone distant, focused on something far beyond this moment. He'd been preparing to simply walk away when Madison had delivered her final blow. "What? Nothing to say for yourself? Too much of a coward to even defend yourself? Pathetic." The word coward had hung in the air like smoke. James had turned slowly, and for just a second, something flashed across his face, not anger, but a profound exhaustion that seemed to age him a decade. "I should go," he'd said quietly. I'm sorry for the trouble. That's when the bartender, a veteran himself, though few knew it, had spoken up. Wait. His voice carried authority, cutting through the tension. Ma'am, I think you should know who you're talking to. Madison had laughed again. Oh, this should be good. What is he, some kind of big shot pretending to be a regular Joe? Please. Actually, came a voice from near the door. A man in his 50s, silver-haired and distinguished in a navy suit, had stepped forward. His face had gone pale. James Mitchell. James had closed his eyes briefly, a gesture that spoke of a man wishing he could disappear. Colonel Phillips. Sir. The room's energy shifted instantly. Colonel Phillips had crossed the floor quickly, his hand extended. My God, Mitchell. I haven't seen you since the ceremony. He'd turned to address the bar at large, his voice filling the space. This man, nobody, you just verbally assaulted, is Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell. Navy SEAL. 3 combat tours. Silver Star recipient. He's responsible for saving 17 lives during an extraction operation in Fallujah, and that's just the stuff that isn't classified. Madison's face had drained of color. Around them, phones had already emerged from pockets, the scene being recorded from multiple angles. Someone near the bar had pulled up James's military record on their phone. Not hard to find, given that his rescue operation had briefly made national news 6 years ago, before he'd requested to be removed from the public eye. There's more, the bartender had added, his voice respectful. James here, he spends every Saturday morning at the VA hospital. Not for himself, for other vets. Guys who don't have anyone else. He runs a support group, helps them navigate paperwork, drives them to appointments. He doesn't talk about it. Doesn't ask for recognition. Just shows up. James had looked distinctly uncomfortable, his jaw tight. That's enough. Really. This isn't necessary. But Colonel Phillips had continued, his voice thick with emotion. After his wife died, cancer, 3 years ago, James took an honorable discharge to raise his daughter alone. He could have stayed in, could have climbed the ranks, but he chose to be there for Sophie. Works double shifts at a security firm to make ends meet, never complains, never asks for help. He'd fixed Madison with a stern look. So when you talk about people contributing nothing, maybe you should consider that contribution isn't measured by the size of your bank account. The shame on Madison's face had been evident, her hands shaking as the reality of what she'd done crashed over her. Around the bar, whispers had started, phones still recording. By morning, the video would have 3 million views. By the end of the week, her name would trend worldwide, and not in the way she'd always imagined. James had finally spoken, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. I don't want this. I didn't earn those medals to be put on a pedestal. I did my job, same as thousands of others who don't get recognition. And what I do now, at the VA, with Sophie, that's just being a decent human being. It shouldn't be exceptional. He'd looked at Madison then, and there was no triumph in his eyes, only kindness that somehow made her feel smaller than any of her words had made him feel. Ma'am, you're clearly going through something. I hope whatever it is gets better. I really do. Then he'd walked toward the door, pausing only when Colonel Phillips called after him. James, at least let me buy you dinner. You and Sophie. Tomorrow night. James had smiled then, the first genuine smile of the evening. Sophie would love that, sir. She's been wanting to meet some of my old squad. Thank you. As the door closed behind him, Madison had sunk into the nearest chair, her designer dress suddenly feeling like a costume, her expensive jewelry like chains. The bar had remained silent for a long moment before slowly, gradually, returning to life. But no one approached Madison. No one needed to. The judgment was clear in their carefully averted eyes. 3 months later, Madison sat in a folding chair in a community center basement, watching James facilitate a support group for veterans struggling with PTSD. She'd come every week since that night, at first to apologize properly, an apology he'd accepted with grace, and then to volunteer. She'd used her family's resources to fund a new wing at the VA hospital, established a scholarship for children of fallen service members, and quietly donated millions to organizations supporting military families. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 32 years trying to prove her worth through wealth and status, only to discover that worth had nothing to do with either. As she watched James gently encourage a young veteran to share his story, saw the careful attention he paid to each person in the circle, she understood what she'd been missing. Legacy wasn't about buildings with your name on them or Forbes lists or society pages. It was about the lives you touched, the moments you showed up, the quiet dignity of doing good when no one was watching. After the meeting, James approached her. "You didn't have to come back every week," he said, though his tone was warm. "Yes," Madison replied softly. "I really did. You taught me something that night." "What's that?" She smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. "That being somebody has nothing to do with being seen, and everything to do with seeing others." "Thank you for that." James nodded, then gathered his papers. He had to pick up Sophie from her friend's house, help her with math homework, maybe watch a movie if there was time. An ordinary evening in an ordinary life that was, Madison now understood, anything but ordinary. It was real. It was enough. And in a world obsessed with more, enough was the most extraordinary thing of all.